Professor Francione is here with us today, and this is a great honor once more for my class, my little class in a postgraduate course in Greece, which starts from scarcity of resources, a global scarcity, discusses issues of human welfare, economic welfare, goes to get to know the problems that humanity is facing regarding objectives and means and things like that. And in the end, we're discussing diet, because diet is a big part of our ecological footprint. And then we come to discuss animal rights, because, this is for many people, this is a facilitating factor to make decisions on how to change and become a more conscious and more responsible consumer and also producer. So this is the setting that you have come once more to talk. Well, I want you to take over now and give us a brief outline of what you deem important about your theory and your work. And let's say this will happen for the first hour, and in the second hour we can take you can take questions. Students have a lot of questions so far, and so I think it's going to be a very lively conversation. And also guests have a lot of questions. I'm sure about this. So let's get going.
Let me say at the outset, I'm not an economist, but I find it remarkable that it seems to me insane from an economic point of view and from a rational point of view. Animal agriculture seems to me to be insane. It is economically inefficient. It is destroying the planet, which is going to make further wealth development impossible. I mean, we are heading for and already experiencing tremendous global catastrophe as a result of animal agriculture. And it really is, Elon Musk was asking people for ideas to help deal with global warming. And I couldn't help tweeting him and saying, you want an idea to deal with global warming? It's really easy. We all stop eating animals. Global warming diminishes dramatically. I mean, if we all stop, if magically we all stopped, if animal agriculture stopped, it would probably be the best chance that we have for averting global catastrophe in terms of climate. So maybe y'all who are economists, and I'm not an economist, can educate me about how this is at all rational, because this strikes me as being completely irrational from an economic point of view and from an environmental point of view, when you look, even if you look at the environment only in economic terms. And anyway, I do things mostly from a position of moral theory, and I'm interested in nonviolence, and I'm interested in how we make a more just planet. And it seems to me that our thinking about animals is really, really confused. This morning, I got up this morning. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. I realize it's the afternoon for you all. Early. What time is it there? 5. Okay. I got up this morning, and the first story I saw was that Kurt Zuma, who's a football player in England, pled guilty to a violation of the Animal Welfare Act because he kicked and slapped his cat. He didn't kill the cat. He kicked and slapped the cat, and which is obviously a bad thing to do. And he pled guilty to violating the Animal Welfare Act. And I wrote an editorial right before I logged on that I just sent off to some British newspapers, asking or raising the question, what's the difference between Kurt Zuma and the rest of us? Kurt Zuma engaged in the Animal Welfare Act in Britain prohibits inflicting unnecessary suffering on an animal. Okay. He kicked the cat. He slapped the cat. He had no reason for doing it. It was completely gratuitous. It was unnecessary. Okay. What he did was wrong, morally and legally. No problem with that. Then the question becomes, what is the difference between Kurt Zuma and the rest of us who are eating animals? What's the difference between all of the British people who are not standing in the dock with Kurt Zuma, who eat animals? What's the difference between the judge? I'm assuming the judge isn't a vegan, but the judge who's going to sentence Kurt Zuma. What's the difference between the judge who ate bacon and eggs or whatever he or she had for breakfast this morning and Kurt Zuma who kicked and slapped the cat? And the answer is there is no difference. We profess to take animals seriously. We profess to believe that they have moral value. The reality is we don't believe that at all, at all. Because the reality is, although we say that we think it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering on animals, those of us who are not vegans are doing that every single day. And we're doing it in ways that are morally indistinguishable. There's really no difference between the person who kicks and slaps the cat and the person who purchases or kills an animal and eats the animal, or purchases the animal and purchases the dead animal from the store. There's no difference whatsoever. And so what I've been focusing on, particularly in the past, well, for much of my career, has been the strange juxtaposition between our professed concern about animals, our love of animals. I mean, many people would say they love animals, but they eat them, they wear them, they use them, but they say they love them, which when I hear that, what I hear is something similar to when somebody says, I love my wife, but I beat her. I see that as sort of a similar locution. But what I did, this is my most recent book. It's got a nice cover. It's called Why Veganism Matters, the Moral Value of Animals. And what I argue in that book is I say, look, if you look at the history, if you look at Western thinking, okay, up until the 19th century, animals were excluded completely from the moral and legal community. They didn't count at all. They were regarded as things. We couldn't have obligations that we owed to animals. We only could have obligations that concerned animals. So I can't have an obligation to this pen. Why? Because it's not sentient and it has no interests. I can't adversely affect it. I could break it, but I can't adversely affect it because it does not have any interest for me to adversely affect. But I can have obligations that concern the pen. For example, not to throw the pen at somebody. But that's not an obligation that I owe to the pen. That's an obligation I owe to the person that I shouldn't throw the pen at. That was much thinking about animals up to the 19th century. We could have obligations that concerned animals. For example, we shouldn't be gratuitously cruel to animals because if we are, we will be cruel to other humans. We'll be cruel to humans. That was a position that Kant had. It was a position that Thomas Aquinas had. And that we will, we're going to, if we're cruel to them, we'll be cruel to other humans. And we shouldn't be cruel to the other humans. That was an obligation we owed, though, to other humans, not to the animals. The animals, they were outside the moral and legal community altogether. They didn't count. And that characterizes Western thinking for the most part up to the 19th century. Now, there were two reasons why we thought it was quite fine to exclude animals from the moral and legal community. One was that they were cognitive inferiors. That is, they didn't have minds that were sophisticated as ours. They couldn't think, they couldn't reason, they couldn't engage in abstract reasoning and things like that. They couldn't use symbolic communication, they couldn't speak. And so they were inferiors, cognitive, mental, whatever word you want to use, inferior. The other argument was that they were spiritual inferiors, that we were made in God's image, they weren't. So there was a lot of, a lot of people shared both things. For example, John Locke believed that God had given animals to humans to use because they were spiritual inferiors. That God, they were not made in God's image. But also Locke thought that it was quite all right to do this because animals couldn't engage in abstract reasoning and they were cognitively inferior. So they were both spiritually inferior and cognitively inferior. And many philosophers were, shared both of those perspectives, that animals were both spiritually inferior and cognitively inferior. Now, this changes in the 19th century dramatically, first in Britain and then throughout Europe and then over here. And it changes as a result of a recognition that sentience, i.e. being subjectively aware, is morally relevant. By the way, I'm a New Yorker. If I speak fast, I can't stop. I try very hard not to speak quickly, but it doesn't work very well. If you don't understand something, then just put up your electronic hand, and I will, repeat it, whatever.
But you're also Italian, so that's why you speak.
Yes, yes.
I'm a New Yorker.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. I gesticulate a lot. See if I can. When I try not to, it doesn't work. I was interviewed for a movie on this guy's making a movie, and he came to interview me, and he said, now, if he had the camera set up, and he said, if you can just keep your hand on the table. You can say one hand in your lap and one hand on the table. And I said, that's not going to work. I'm telling you now, that's not going to work. And it didn't. So in the 19th century, this changes as a result of a recognition that sentience matters, that animals are sentient. That is, they're subjectively aware. They can experience pain. They can suffer. They can experience distress. And that's morally relevant. This comes, although it came from a number of people, it's featured prominently in the work of Jeremy Bentham, who is more or less credited, probably unfairly, but credited with being the chief expositor of this idea. The idea that if animals are sentient, their suffering matters morally. We have to take their suffering into consideration. And Bentham argues, he says, look, it doesn't matter, they can't, whether they can use symbolic communication, whether they can use, whether or not they have abstract concepts, whether they are rational, whatever. It doesn't really matter. What matters is they can suffer. And if they can suffer, they matter morally, and we have to take their suffering into consideration. However, it's not that he thinks the cognitive inferiority is irrelevant. He thinks cognitive inferiority is very relevant. What he does is he bifurcates, and he says, if animals are sentient, they have an interest in not suffering. But because they're not us, they don't have an interest in continuing to live. They don't have an interest in continued living. They only have an interest in not suffering. So he bifurcates this interest in not suffering from an interest in continuing to live. And he says that animals don't have an interest in continuing to live. So it's okay for us to kill and eat them, but we just have to take their suffering seriously. And so that was Bentham's position. What's really interesting is I'm not a historian of ideas, but I would imagine there are very few instances in human thinking where a paradigm shifts so dramatically, so quickly. Because we come into the 19th century having had thousands of years of believing that animals didn't matter at all morally. And again, there were some people who thought they did. I'm not saying that there weren't ever any exceptions. I'm saying that as a cultural matter, the people who thought animals mattered were the minority, strong minority. And so we have thousands of years of thinking that, animals don't matter morally. And then all of a sudden the 19th century comes, and by the time we leave the 19th century and come into the 20th century, we have the view that animals matter morally, and that we even have laws that say that we have an obligation to treat them humanely and to not inflict unnecessary suffering on them. That's a fairly dramatic shift in a fairly short period of time. So let me just recap. Bentham bifurcates the interest in not suffering from the interest in continuing to live. And he says animals have an interest in not suffering, but because they are cognitively inferior to us, they have an interest in they don't have an interest in continuing to live. So it's all right for us to continue to use and kill them. And he talked about that primarily in terms of eating. I mean, we do all sorts of things to animals in which we kill them. The primary thing in which we do is we eat them. We kill and eat approximately 80 billion land animals. And we don't even know how many sea animals. The estimates are between 1 and 3 trillion. I mean, mind-boggling numbers every year. So every year, even if you take the lower number of sea animals, if you take the lowest estimate of sea animals, we are killing and eating every year more animals than the total number of human beings who have ever walked on the planet. Okay. And I'm talking about going way back, because I understand that some Americans think the planet's only 6,000 years old. You know, there's a lot of it's a strange country, this country. And, but I'm saying the rest of the world believes that in something called evolution, and that that we've been walking upright for a long time and evolving, et cetera. But ever since we crawled out of the swamp, if you take the total number of humans who have existed, we kill more animals in 1 year than the total number of humans who have existed. It's a mind-boggling number. And so, Bentham said it's all right for us to continue to use and kill animals. We just have to take their interest in that suffering seriously. The problem is, how the hell do you do that? Animals remained as property, just as they were when they start off the 19th century being property, they end the 19th century being property, they're still property. Animals are economic commodities. So we say that they matter morally, but actually they don't, because they're things. We say that they matter morally. We say that they have a moral value, but in fact, what they've got is an economic value, an extrinsic external economic value. It costs money to protect animal interests. As a result, and generally we spend that money when it's economically justified. If we don't, then there will be economic consequences. And this is why the standard of animal welfare is very low, because it costs money to protect interests. And as a general matter, there are some small exceptions, but as a general matter, the level of protection that we give animals is the level that we have to in order to exploit them in an economically efficient way. Okay? Standards are very low. Animals are property. I have 5 dogs. I don't even know where they are right now. They're somewhere. And I'm surprised that they haven't, they can sometimes just bark for long periods of time, and then we have to move them to a different part of the house. But I have 5 dogs. I love them. They're rescue dogs. I would never buy a dog in a pet store. I mean, these are rescue dogs. 4 of them are abuse cases. They were horribly abused. And I love them. I regard them as members of my family, but they're property. They're my property. If I want it right now, if I said, you know, I got dogs, a pain in the ass to have dogs, and you know, it stops me from doing things I want to do, and I would really like to come and you know, and visit Greece, but I can't. It's hard to find a dog sitter, and you know, because it's horribly hard to find somebody who comes and stays in your house, take care of your dogs in the way that you want it done, and so I could take them all to the vet today and say, kill them all. They're interfering in my academic life. I want to travel more. I could take them to a shelter in which I'd sign over ownership because they're property. I would sign over ownership in my chattel property and say, if you can't find them a home, you can kill them. They're property. I can value them. It's like any other property I have. I can say, look, I love this pen. This was given to me by somebody I really care about. It's just a plastic pen, but I can say, I really value this pen. You know, it's important to me. I value it. I could also say, I don't care about this pen, and throw it away. It's my property. An incident of it being my property is I can value it high, I can value it low. I have dogs. They are my property. I can value them high. I can value them low. I can treat them as members of my family, or I can have them all living outside and being sentient burglar alarms to alert me to if anybody got close to my house. They're property. So although we say we care about animals and we have laws, we even have laws, criminal laws. We impose criminal penalties on people for violating anti-cruelty laws. That sort of indicates that we take this, or we seem to take this seriously. So we say animals matter, they matter morally. We have laws that protect them. I mean, hell, as I told you, I got up this morning and I see Kurt Zuma is going to suffer some criminal penalty because he kicked his cat. So we have laws, we have criminal laws we impose. Bad, bad, bad. However, because animals are property, what we say is a lot of nonsense. Because we say they matter morally, but they don't. They're things. When we say they matter morally, what we mean is some of us will value them high, mostly those of us who have dogs and cats and other, companion animals. But that's what it means. It means that their property, they can be valued very low, and they generally are valued very low. But we have the freedom to choose to accord them a higher value, and some of us will. That's all it means. So the reality is, it simply doesn't make any sense. So what I do in this book is basically to argue. So what I argue in this book is, it makes no sense to talk about animals being able to suffer but not having an interest in continuing to live. And what I argue is that sentience, the subjective awareness, entails logically and psychologically an interest in continuing to live. It makes no sense to talk about sentient beings that don't have an interest in continuing to live and don't have a morally significant interest in life. And the example I use is, I say, look, many people believe, for example, like Peter Singer, like Tom Reagan, like many philosophers believe that animals, well, they do have different gradations of mental abilities. That's clear. There's a difference between a mouse and a chimpanzee. I don't know that I'd call it a matter of sophistication. I would call it just a matter of difference. But the thinking is, on part of a lot of these philosophers, is that animals are different from us. They're stuck in an eternal present. They're not connected to a future self. And do you understand that they don't think of themselves in the future. They only know what's going on in the instant, and they live in that sort of slice, that instant. So what happens is, I don't think animals live in an eternal present. I don't think my dogs live in an eternal present. That is, I think they think ahead, and I think they remember things. I think they have memories of things and that. But you know what? I can't prove that, because I don't, talking about the minds of other humans is enough of a challenge. I assume that we all think the same way, because we speak in what we understand each other when we talk. And so when you say I'm in pain, I more or less understand what that means, because I have been in pain. So if you say I'm in pain, I understand. I can refer to my experience and my recollection of that. If you say I am in love, I can reflect on that and sort of think, what that means. And I understand that, even though your sensation and emotion of loving might be very different from mine. But I think it's impossible to know what goes on in the minds of animals. I don't think we're ever going to understand what goes on in the minds of animals. So this idea that, well, an animal, in order to matter morally in terms of having a life, an interest in a morally significant interest in living, that animal's got to have, a mind like ours. And the answer is, this is a waste of time talking about what I call this the problem of similar minds. Peter Singer does it. Tom Reagan does it. Peter Singer says, well, some animals are rational and self-aware, and they matter more than other animals who are not rational and self-aware. Tom Reagan uses the expression subject of life. Every other philosopher basically argues that in order for animals to have a morally significant interest in living, and so therefore for it to be wrong to kill them, even if you treat them humanely, they all argue that animals have to be cognitively like us. So, for example, Peter Singer says non-human great apes, chimpanzees, orangutans, bonobos, they matter more than mice because they're more like us. Tom Reagan talks about the concept of a subject of a life, which means basically those beings who are intellectually sophisticated at a certain level, they have the right to respectful treatment, which means you have to respect their lives. I reject that. I think other philosophers basically maintain sentience is not enough. I say it is enough. And I say it is enough for several reasons, and lots of reasons, but I'm going to talk about two. One is we recognize that where humans are involved. Let's assume you've got a human being who is stuck in an eternal present. That is, no ability to think in the future, no recollection of the past. People who have extreme dementia are exactly in that position. Okay, and they are literally in an eternal present. They can't remember anything about the past. They can't think and plan in the future. Now, do we think they are persons, i.e., do we think that they have a morally significant interest in their lives, or do we think it's perfectly fine to kill them humanely, take their organs out and transplant them into other humans? And the answer is, of course, we don't. Why not? Because they're persons, because we recognize that they have a morally significant interest in continuing to live, okay, even if their lives are very different from ours. And the reason why we think that they do is because they're sentient. And to be conscious, to be sentient, to be subjectively aware is to be connected to a future self, even if it is the self only the self in the next second of time. That's every sentient being is connected to himself or herself in the next second of time. And there are some humans that are in that position. We have no problem saying they're persons. Their lives matter. It would be wrong to kill them, take their lives, because their life matters to them. However it is, they value it. They value it. I may not understand it. My parents were in a nursing home. They passed away now. And, my parents got very old and they had memory issues and stuff, but they were able to have conversations with them. But there were people who lived in the nursing home with my parents who were in extreme dementia. And you could talk to them and you could have very pleasant conversations with them. And then you could come back 30 seconds later and they didn't remember who you were. And when you talked to them, they had no recollection of the past. And if you said to them, what are you going to do when I walk out of this room? They would say, I have no idea. They wouldn't even understand the question. They have no ability to think in the future, no ability to think in the past. They're stuck in an eternal present. Now, I don't think most animals are in that position. I live with 5 dogs. I have no doubt that they think that they have memories and that they think about the future. None, absolutely none. But let's assume, but I don't know. I can't prove that because I think in terms of concepts which are linked to language. I don't know how the hell they think. They don't use symbolic communication. I have no idea how animals think. None, absolutely none. Neither does anybody else. Okay, including cognitive pathologists. They don't know either. They just guess. And so I have no idea how they think. That they think, I have no doubt. How they think, no idea. No idea. I don't think they're stuck in an eternal present, but I don't know. I do know some humans are stuck in an eternal present. Absolutely clear. But yet, I have no trouble saying they are persons. That is, they have a morally significant interest in continuing to live By the way, that's what I mean when I use person. When we talk about personhood, what we're talking about generally is, does this being, when we ask, is X a person, what we're asking is, does X have a morally significant interest in continuing to live? For example, in the abortion debate, in America, we don't talk about morality as a general matter. As a matter of fact, we avoid it at all costs. We do, however, talk about abortion endlessly. And so we talk about whether the fetus is a person, by which it is meant, does the fetus have a morally significant interest in continuing to live? So that the woman in whose body the fetus is residing should not have the power to make a decision to terminate the fetus, kill the fetus. And so, but the issue when we're talking about whether a fetus is a person, we're not asking whether the fetus is human. Obviously, the fetus is human. It's a human fetus. If a woman is pregnant, she's pregnant with a human fetus. She's not pregnant with a giraffe fetus. She's pregnant with a human fetus. So the issue about whether or not the fetus is a person is not whether the fetus is human. The issue is the fetus a person, i.e., a being with a morally significant interest in continuing to live? And I can't pronounce your name because go ahead, speak. Go ahead. Oh, does somebody have their name up? Hand? Okay, no, I'm sorry. I thought somebody had their hand up. All right. And so what I argue is that we recognize where humans are concerned, that somebody who is in fact stuck in an eternal present, without doubt, that human is still a person because that human is sentient and that human is connected to a future self in terms of the next, at the very least, next second of consciousness. And if you get away from this, because we recognize that sentience, to be sentient, is to have an interest in life. That's what sentience is all about. It is about providing input to me so I can make decisions which preserve my life. I may make wrong decisions, but nevertheless, it's the function of sentience is to provide information to me to know how I want to deal with the environment that I'm in. And once we move away from that, where humans are involved, it becomes hopelessly arbitrary, which is why we say sentience is enough. Let's think about it. Let's imagine you got two humans, one of whom is profoundly demented, end stage of dementia, no ability to think in the future, no ability to recall in the past. This person is contrasted with somebody who is demented, very demented, but not in the end stage of dementia. This person can think, can plan for 2-3 minutes in the future and can remember a few things in the past 5 minutes. Remember past 5 minutes, plan next 5 minutes. So let's assume you got those two people. And you say, the first one's not a person, and the second one is a person because the second one is connected to a future self. Well, think about how arbitrary that would be. When does personhood come into existence? Does it come into existence in minute 1, minute 2, minute 3? When does it supervene? When does it sort of fall from heaven and attached to the human? Say, oh, this human is a person at minute 3.5. I mean, it's hopelessly arbitrary. There's really no way to not make it arbitrary. To say that there's got to be some sort of arbitrary period in the future that this person can think to in order for this person to be a person, this human to be a person. It makes no sense. And so what I argue in the book is that sentience is sufficient for personhood, and that animals have a morally significant, sentient animals have a morally significant interest, not just in not suffering, but a morally significant interest in continuing to live. If that argument works, and I believe it does, if that argument works, we have to stop using them as commodities. We have to stop treating them as property. And we have to abolish our use of animals, our use of domesticated animals completely. And I argue that if animals matter morally, we are committed to veganism as a way of living. I have been, we can't justify continuing to eat animals or wear them or use them for whatever purposes we're using them, and take them seriously morally. The only issue, actually, I think, I realize that the veganism question controversial. I don't think it is at all. I think the only use of animals we make that is controversial is the use of animals, our use of animals to cure serious human illnesses. That I think requires more of a discussion. I don't agree with it. I think it's wrong, but I think you got to talk about that a little bit more. That requires more of a reliance on rights. Whereas what I'm talking about now doesn't even require that. It requires that we simply accept that it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering on animals. Well, if animals matter morally, then, and if they matter morally in terms of their lives, not just their suffering, but their lives, then we can't use them for any purpose which is frivolous. And eating them, I mean, we don't need to eat animals for health. Okay, I've been a vegan. This is my 40th year as a vegan. Okay, and I ain't dead yet. And I have more energy than most of my students who are young enough to be my grandchildren, basically. And so, I mean, we don't need to be eating animals for health. Nobody maintains. As a matter of fact, mainstream healthcare people are telling us that eating animal products is detrimental to our health. The head of the former head of the American Cardiological Association said that there are two sorts of doctors. There are those who tell their patients to be vegan. There are two sorts of heart doctors: those that tell their patients to be vegan, and those who haven't read the data, because it's absolutely clear that heart health, everything, as a general matter, the more animal products you eat, the more detrimental the effect on your body is. So, but we don't certainly need, I'm not a doctor, but go ahead, Anastasia.
Professor Campbell was here 2 weeks ago, and he covered these things. You don't need to go into this.
Okay,
just
fine.
Consider this thought.
Okay. If somebody says I'm an environmentalist, and then I listen to them for a couple minutes, and I pick up that they're not vegans, I don't bother listening anymore, because they're clowns. They're not environmentalists. If you claim to be an environmentalist, you're not a vegan. You aren't thinking about the situation seriously enough. So it's a disaster. It's an environmental disaster. And so I'm just going off of the proposition that it's wrong to inflict unnecessary suffering on animals. Whatever necessity means, it means we can't justify animal use for reasons of pleasure, amusement, or convenience. But that's the only explanation, the only justification we have for 99.9999999% of our animal use. And we eat animals because we like the taste. We eat animals because it's traditional. We eat animals because, it's convenient to stop and get a hamburger rather than, whatever. These are transparently frivolous reasons. If animals matter morally, we cannot be inflicting any amount of suffering on them or killing them for reasons of pleasure, amusement, or convenience. This just follows logically. If they matter morally, we cannot impose any suffering on them or kill them unless we have a good reason. And we don't have a good reason for eating them, wearing them, using them. We just don't have good reasons to do it. That's the only reasons we have are transparently frivolous ones of pleasure, amusement, or convenience. So I argue that we are committed to being vegans. And that's really what this book is about. There's some other stuff in there, but it was intended to try to address people who think that veganism is extreme. And the whole thesis of the book is veganism isn't extreme. What's extreme is thinking that animals matter morally and continuing to eat them, wear them, and use them. That's extreme. It's extremely confused is what it is. And so that's why I wrote that book. However, so that's basically the view. The takeaway is, because animals are property, they're economic commodities, animal welfare is a fantasy. Talking about animal welfare, when people talk about animal welfare and they say, well, making things better for the animals, that's on a par with Santa Claus and other fantasy. Santa Claus, you know what Santa Claus is, right? I mean, the concept of Santa Claus exists in Greece even. It's on a level with Santa Claus. It's a fantasy. Animal welfare is always very low, and it's very low for reasons that you people as economists should understand. because it requires money to protect animal interests. When are you going to spend that money? Are you going to spend it simply because you have moral views? And the answer is no. If you're raising pigs and it costs you $1 to get the pig, and it costs you 50 cents to feed the pig, and then get the pig to market, you've got to make at least $1.50 to break even, or actually you have to make more. You'd have to sell the pig for more because you've lost the use of the money for that time. So you've got to sell the pig for $1.50 at least. If somebody comes along and says, I want you to give the pig more space, say, well, that's great, but if I give the pig more space, it's going to cost me $1.80 to raise and kill this pig. $1.80 if the market is only paying $1.50 and people are not willing to spend that money, either because they don't have it or because the demand is elastic or whatever. If they're not willing to spend it, then you're out of luck. And so the level of animal welfare is always going to be low, particularly given that the margins for animal products they're fairly small. So it's not that farmers are making a huge amount of profit on animal products. They're not. And also because you have all of these, you have the European Economic Community, you've got, the North American Free Trade Agreement, you've got General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs and all these regional agreements that put pressure. So if somebody who's in one of these regional organizations sells a product, it increases welfare, unilaterally increases welfare, sells the product for a higher amount. If the demand for the lower welfare product is there, unless you can keep those products out, when generally you can't, those products will come in and knock the higher welfare producer out. It costs a lot of money to raise animals in a way that significantly reduces suffering. Lots and lots and lots of money. You can't do it. I mean, for all intents and purposes, you can't do it. I don't even know what humane means, but I can tell you that there are a number of producers in the United States. I'm sure there are people in Greece, people in England, who sell supposedly higher welfare meat, dairy, eggs, not required by law, but it's just they're trying to hit a niche market of more affluent people who are concerned about animals. And I've got one of these stores right near my house. And it's amazing because the cost of meat, it's through the roof. And there have been a number of exposés that show that these animals are being treated horribly. They're not really being treated even all that much better, but people are paying a lot more money for those products. So if you were really going to have products that were, the result of animals that never suffered or, suffered only a small amount or something and had a really nice, they weren't killed in violent ways, et cetera, you couldn't afford it. If you could afford it, you wouldn't be eating animals anyway, because you would care so much. You wouldn't be willing, you wouldn't want to pay that money because you would care too much about, you'd be caring about the animal and you wouldn't be consuming the animal. So that's really, this idea that, we're going to be able to do this humanely is a fantasy. So that's the first thing to understand, is that animals are property. And as a result, animal welfare standards are always low, number one. Number two, it's, in certain ways, it doesn't matter whether this, obviously less suffering is better than more suffering. But the point is that if animals matter morally, no amount of suffering is morally justifiable. And, before some of you, one of you said, well, what if you're starving? Well, if I'm on a desert island and I'm going to starve unless I eat an animal, is it morally justifiable? My argument is no, it's not morally justifiable, but it may be morally excusable. In the same sense, sometimes we recognize that people don't have a choice. There have been cases where humans have eaten other humans. As a matter of fact, one of the classes that I teach, I'm a law professor and I teach law and philosophy. And when I teach criminal law, there's a case that it's the first case in my casebook where these guys are on a boat and they're starving. There's been a storm and they're now in a small little boat, in the middle of the ocean, and they haven't eaten for weeks. And so they kill, there's 4 guys, 3, and they kill this one guy, and they eat him and they drink his blood. And because actually you can go a long time without eating, but you can't go a long time without drinking. So actually the first thing they did was they drink his blood, but then they eat him, and then they get rescued, and they get prosecuted. It's an English case, and they get prosecuted, and they get condemned to be hung because they murdered this guy. Queen Victoria commutes their sentence to 6 months imprisonment and lets them go. Why? Because it's crazy to say these guys are on a boat in the middle of the ocean. They haven't eaten in 3 weeks. So, they didn't, morality and culpability and responsibility involve some level of ability to choose. And those people didn't have any, arguably didn't really have any ability to choose. They had to do something to survive. It didn't make it justifiable, but it made it excusable. That is, it was morally wrong, but the moral wrongness was mitigated. The culpability was mitigated by the compulsion of the situation. So if I were on a desert island and, there's nothing for me to eat except this rabbit. Now that would raise an interesting question, because then what the hell is the rabbit eating? But let's imagine there's no life on this island and a rabbit just parachutes in or something, and I've got this rabbit, and it's a question: do I eat the rabbit or do I starve to death? Would it be justifiable for me to kill and eat the rabbit? And the answer is no. It's not justifiable. It's not all right, but it's excusable because there was a compulsion there that basically obviated my ability to choose to make a moral choice. So, I think that, we cannot justify, if we think animals matter morally. If you don't think animals matter morally, then, I'm sorry you're having to hear this. Don't blame me, blame her. She makes you come to class. But if you don't think animals matter morally, then that's a different issue. But if you accept that animals do matter morally, if you believe that what we do to animals does raise moral issues, and if you do think that animals have a moral value, it is unclear to me. No, I shouldn't say that. It is completely clear to me that it is not the case that we can continue to eat, wear, and use animals as commodities, because we're treating them as things. And we're saying on one hand they have moral value, but our treating them as things is on the other hand a recognition that they aren't, or an acknowledgement that they don't have any moral value. So that's basically my position. If you want me to address some of these things that you sent me on that list, Anastasia, I'm happy to do that. If not, we can just go to questions, whatever you all want to do.
Okay. Well, is cell meat in your list?
Is cell meat? Oh,
cultured meat in your list. Is it there?
No, it is not there.
Oh. I would like you to tell us what you think about cultured meat. The meat that comes from cells which are taken from animals.
Yeah, I don't believe in any animal use. So I don't think we should be using and killing any animals, either, for cells or anything else. Now, I think it is, there's a whole bunch of things going on here. Cell meat is not going to replace regular meat, and there's the reason why Cargill and some of these big corporations, these big meat corporations, are investing in cell meat is not because they expect cell meat to take the place of meat. It's because it takes such a huge amount of land to produce animal products that we're running out of land to make more conventional animal products. So cell meat will be not a replacement for the market for conventional meat products, but will be an adjunct to it. So and what'll happen as a practical matter is once they develop this cell meat, they will then pressure politicians who are generally, useless, and will go along with what industry wants. They'll pressure them to be able to market this as meat and not as cell meat. So it won't be, and so it'll just be an adjunct. It's just going to be an adjunct to meat supply. It's not. It's the idea that cell meat is going to replace meat is crazy. it's completely crazy. There are soy products that basically taste, you couldn't tell the difference between the soy product, no animal cells at all. You can't tell the difference between the soy product and meat. But people who want to eat meat are not, they're not interested in that. They want real meat. Similarly, cell meat is not going to be seen as real meat. People who want to eat real meat are going to continue to eat real meat, and it's not going to replace the market for meat. I'm also, I not only think it's wrong, the cell meat requires taking the cells out of animals, and generally, although this is, I have read this is changing, although I don't know to what extent it is. They use fetal, they use fetal serum to culture the cells, and so that involves more animal exploitation. It involves basically taking the calf from the mother at the slaughterhouse and then getting the fetal serum in, because it's very expensive, and then they use that for the culture of the cells. So there's animal exploitation that's going on there. So I'm opposed to that.
Let's assume that this is not the case. Let's assume that we get the technology to not use fetal bovine serum and use just, whatever, greens and grass or whatever. And also, we don't need to take something from a live animal, but we can just take a fallen feather. Let's take this extreme case. Do you think that something is wrong with that too?
Well, obviously, it's. If you're telling me that we can use feathers that naturally fall from birds, mm-hmm. I'm not exactly sure how that would work, but let's assume that it does work. That we could we don't have to raise birds. We could just hang around and sort of when we found a pigeon feather or something like that, we can culture it and we could get cells out of it. Obviously, that's better than raising and killing animals. But part of what I'm trying to do is get people away from this idea that what eating means is eating meat or eating animal products. Let's assume, to take your example, let's assume that I was able to take some cells, and I don't even have to scrape them off of you. I can get some cells, let's just hypothesize with, I get it from a hair, a hair that falls or something. I see your brush and I just take a strand of your hair off of your brush, right? And I culture that and I produce an arm of Anastasia. And I say, let's eat this arm. The response would be, wait a minute, I didn't harm Anastasia to get to do this. I got her hair, I cultured it, and I've got this nice fresh arm. Most people would say that's really disgusting because what's wrong with it? I didn't take it off of her. She didn't suffer. I didn't exploit her in any way. I just took her hair off of her and she let me have the hair. She gave me the hair. I told her I was going to take it. She let me have it. I would say if I produce the arm and I serve the arm at dinner, people are going to freak out and they're not going to want to eat it. Why not? Because humans are not things to eat. And what I'm trying to get people to see is that non-humans are persons and they are not things to eat either. And so we need to get away from this idea that we're not eating if we don't have meat or dairy or some sort of, if we don't have animal foods, we're not eating. I'm trying to get people away from that. Because I think that's in many ways, that's the problem, that this idea, this is why, this idea of the fake meat, like the not the cell cultured meat, but the, whatever you want to call the mock meat, I guess the mock meats. I don't eat those. And I don't eat those for several reasons. First of all, I got tons of salt in them. They're really very bad for your health. I mean, there's like huge amounts of salt and they have no nutritive value. But also, it really grosses me out. And there's something really sort of creepy about the idea that, they have these things that taste just like meat. And it's like, is it better than eating meat? And the answer is, yeah, sure it is. But there's also something peculiar about it. It's like if you came into my house and I said, see that lampshade there? That lampshade is taken from the skin of somebody who was killed by the Nazis. You would be upset and say, that's terrible. You shouldn't have that in your house. Well, let's assume you come back to my house and I say, that lampshade that I had, I no longer have it. But I have a fake lampshade. It looks just like it was taken from the skin of somebody who was killed by a Nazi, but it wasn't. It's a fake Nazi human skin lampshade. You'd find that peculiar because you'd say, why do you have such a thing in your house? And similarly, that's because we think of other humans as persons as having moral value. And so mimicking it is a problem. I mean, another example I've used before is, let's assume you have somebody who is a really horrible, misogynist, terrible person who abuses women. And this person stops doing that, but instead buys an inflatable doll, plastic doll, and does all sorts of really horrible things to the plastic doll. Is it better that he's doing things to the plastic doll than to a real human? And the answer is, yeah, it's much better. But there's something weird about it. There's something that makes us uncomfortable about that. And so I want to get us thinking the same way about animals and saying, is it okay to eat, soy sausage? And the answer is, yeah, I mean, it's better than eating real sausage. On the other hand, we've got to, if we're going to progress, we got to move away from this idea that animals are food, and we've got to sort of move away from that and sort of realize they're beings and we're us. And, we've got to stop this idea that some beings are the food of other beings. And because as long as we're thinking in that way, it's not clear to me that we're ever going to really make much progress. And I also think as a practical matter, we're never, the cell meat stuff, that by the time that, look, the reality is by the time that technology develops to the point where it's really the case that no animals are involved and it's economically feasible and it's aesthetically pleasing, I will be dead. You might not be because you're younger than I am, but I certainly will be dead. And it's going to, that's going to be a while. And so, my view is that the solution right now is very easy. You just go vegan. That's it. It's like, it's easy. I mean, I don't understand why anybody thinks it is difficult to go vegan. It's the easy. I've done many things in my life. One of the easiest things I've done is to go vegan. Very easy, but.
Okay, I think it's time to get some questions. Let's start. Let's see how many people would be interested to put a question. Spiridon Sirigos, he's one of our students. Then, oh my goodness, four people. Okay, let's start with Spiros Sirigos. I would like to ask everybody to be as concise as possible so that we can accommodate a lot of questions.
I would like to thank you for your presence. Unfortunately, I'm attending from a hospital, so it's not very easy for me to use the camera.
Okay.
I remember once in your paper, the title was Animals, Property or Persons, dated 2004. You mentioned that an animal's right is to live free of suffering, so just as important as a person's right to live free of suffering. So the reason for my first question, as I have another one, is our dog Hermes. Hermes is a French bulldog, and a month ago lost the ability to move both his rear legs because of his morphology, while his parents were morphology champions. When as a breed they are short-headed, which means breathing issues, difficulties in heat dissipation, their body is compact, having as a result not to be able to swim. Anyway, I want to ask you, do we have the right to play the god? I mean, do we have the right to create dogs as all the breeds are made by human? Do we have the right to develop morphology rules, making us happy by creating animals that they are condemned in suffering the whole life? I'm aware of the answer, but I would appreciate having your opinion too.
The answer is no. I have for a long time argued that domestication can't be morally justified. I love my dogs, but they shouldn't exist. And you will not meet anybody on the planet who loves dogs more than I do. I mean, I just love being with dogs. I'm really happy being with dogs. And but if there were two of them left on the planet and it were up to me whether they could breed so that we could have pets, the answer would be no way. I think domestication is wrong. The whole idea of bringing submissive and subservient being, you create these beings because they're submissive or they're subservient, they do what you want them to do, whatever, and they I think it's just is really morally problematic. And so no, I don't think we have the right to do that. I don't know what the paper, I don't know what paper he's referring to. Which one is it? Was that the one that was in I don't, was that the one that was in
Property or Persons, dated 2004.
Oh, I think, okay. All right. I think that was the one that was in, Anastasia, is that the one that was in the Cass Sunstein book, the Oxford book? I'm just trying to remember what paper it is. Do you know?
I don't remember.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, look, I think all animals, human and non-human, should have the right to be free from, you can't make a world in which we're all free from suffering. You can't have, but you can make a world in which none of us suffer as a result of being used exclusively as means to ends. So you can say all humans should be free from all suffering from being used as a slave. And so we can't provide a pain-free life for you. You're going to suffer. You're going to die. But we can say that none of your suffering will come from being used as a chattel slave. Same thing as I think that animals should not be, and no animal shouldn't suffer from being used instrumentally either. And so, yeah, I agree with you completely. Domestication is wrong. It's a moral disaster. But I can also tell you this. There are several things I say that really make even animal people very angry. One of them is that I'm opposed to domestication. They don't like that. So thank you. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you. They don't, they get upset when I say domestication is wrong. And I'm not really sure why. But they do. They get very upset with me because they think that, people don't want, that if people think that you think it's wrong for them to have dogs and cats, they're never going to listen to want to go vegan. And the answer is it's not the experience I have. My view is we have an obligation to give homes to the animals that we do have that are on this planet now. And so we ought to take care of those animals. We just ought not to bring more animals into existence. And I don't have any problem getting people to see that that's a completely consistent position with the position I'm articulating about veganism. But people get very upset about the domestication thing. They really do. By the way, my dogs are all vegans too, before anybody asks me. They're all vegans. They have been for decades. And I have to say, we adopt dogs that are really sort of have health issues. And we've had magnificent results with having our dogs on vegan food. Magnificent results. I mean, they've really done very, very well health-wise. Anyway, okay, next question.
Thank you.
Panayoti, thank you very much. Panayoti, are you ready?
Yes. Hello, sir.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. Sorry, I can't find my camera. Last minute problem, but I can find it. Sorry about that.
All right.
I would like to ask that a lot of people believe that veganism is elitist because it is quite expensive and difficult finding vegan food. What is your opinion on this aspect?
Nonsense. I'll tell you why. I have a website. I have several of them, but one of my websites is howdoigovegan.com. You can find a whole bunch of recipes there. It's cheap to be a vegan. Animal products are expensive. I'm amazed when I go to the store and I see how much meat is. It's remarkable. I can eat for an entire week on what people spend on for a meal where they have 4 kids and they're eating steak or something. I mean, it's not elitist at all. It's actually very cheap. What's expensive is stuff like the fake meat, like the tofurkey, or I don't know what you have in Greece. I'm sure you have some of this stuff there too. But there's a lot of these fake meat things, and they cost a lot of money. But I don't eat that stuff because it has no nutritive value. It's got tons of salt, and salt's not good for you. And so, it's not expensive at all to be a vegan. We have recipes on the site where you can feed a family, of 6 for $3, which is not a lot of money. And, I buy things I buy a lot of lentils and beans and stuff, and I make large quantities of stuff. And then you just put seasonings in and stuff because the taste all comes from seasoning. So, you just use the seasonings and it's perfect. It's not, what's elitist is the idea that the palate pleasure of, that our palate pleasure or whatever is such that it suffices to kill. I think that's elitist. I think that's really elitist, actually. But I don't think it's elitist at all to be. I mean, one of the arguments you hear, I get from time to time is people say, well, if culturally it's important for people to eat animals, then you're being colonialist or whatever. It's another nonsense argument because everything we do is part of somebody's culture. I mean, it's like saying female genital mutilation there are some cultures that think that's a great idea. I think it's wrong. And I'm not in favor of the United States invading countries that practice female genital mutilation and having wars with them, because I'm not in favor of wars. But I certainly think that it's makes no sense to say that, cultural relativism makes no sense as a logical matter. I mean, the idea that, well, it's all right if it's part of somebody's culture. Everything bad is part of somebody's culture. Racism, sex. I mean, look, the longest standing cultural tradition we have is sexism. It is pervasive. It is longstanding. I mean, we've had it for thousands of years. It continues. I mean, we've got a feminist movement for how long, and things are still atrocious. Women are still making, 70 cents to every dollar that men are making. Women are still, the idea that it's 2022 and we are in the situation we are in with gender equality it's an embarrassment. It's a tragedy. And it's appalling. It's obscene, actually. And but so sexism and misogyny, they're cultural. They're part of there are sexist and misogynistic aspects of every culture on the planet. Every single one. So what? That doesn't mean they're okay. So what? The fact that something is part of someone's culture is irrelevant. And so, but I don't think it's elitist at all. I think it's and something else about veganism. In my country, the crops that we feed animals could feed 800 million people. 800 million. Okay. We could feed the world if we didn't have animal agriculture. Because first of all, if everybody was a vegan, we could reduce the land area that is presently used to grow crops by the size of the continent of Africa. It's a big continent. Okay. So we would actually have, if everybody was a vegan, we would have fewer acres under cultivation than more acres under cultivation. And so you want to talk about what's elitist. What's elitist is the standard Western diet. That's elitist. Because what we're doing is we're taking resources. It takes between, depends on how the animal's being raised, but it takes like between 4 and 16 pounds of plant protein to produce 1 pound of beef. It takes a couple of pounds of plant protein to produce 1 pound of chicken. It takes a couple of pounds of plant protein to produce a gallon of milk. So the conversion ratios are not efficient. It's not it's not anywhere near a 1-to-1. So we're using a lot more resources to produce animal products. And what does that do? That allows those of us who can afford them to buy them and eat them. And those who can't, tough. And so what's really, what's really tragic is you've got countries where people are starving because the grain that's grown there is shipped off so that people can feed animals. That's much, not all, but much of the grain that is sitting and rotting in the Ukraine right now, much of that is going to be fed to animals. That's not, so many of our resources, our water, our crops, those are things that are given, that are fed to animals. So eating animals, animal diets and diets that include animal products, those are elitist, and also foods with animal diets have health problems. And particularly when you have countries where you don't have good health care for people who are poor, like my country, then again, that's another way in which poor people get screwed by this system. So no, I don't think it's an elitist at all. But thank you for that question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Okay, just 2 points. The land that would be freed if everybody turned vegan is 75% of the agricultural land that is being used currently. So,
right.
Okay, this is according to, you can find this information in Our World in Data and in other publications. Also, one of our master's thesis last year was about the cost of a whole food diet, a vegan diet, the Greek diet, and the USDA diet. The whole food diet was the cheapest. It was 43% cheaper than the USDA diet, and cheaper than the vegan diet as well, the vegan with the processed foods. So we know the numbers now. We know how much cheaper it is. With real dietary, let's say, plans, menus, weekly menus, and many people helped in collecting these menus from the vegan community, and to which I'm grateful. And that's it. So I also want to remind people that elitism has to do with whether your choices can be made by everybody. If what I do cannot be done by everybody in the world, then I am creating poverty, I'm creating inequality, I'm creating negative externalities to people who are less fortunate than me. This is how I see that as an economist. But I think we are talking about the same thing. So let's go to Natalia, please. Natalia?
Hello from me. First of all, I would like to thank you for your speech and your presence today. I have a problem with my camera equipment, so forgive me for this.
Okay.
I would like to ask you, is animal exploitation happening in veganism? If yes, in what practices or situations?
Well, when you're raising crops, you kill animals when you're planting seed, when you're harvesting. So, but that's like saying, we live in a world in which our actions harm others, and that's human as well. We have we have laws against murder, but people are injured when, in industry, people are injured all the time. So, I mean, obviously, if we all woke up tomorrow morning and we were vegans, we would care more about how we would, affect other animals. So we would probably develop better agricultural practices that were less hazardous to, incidentally and accidentally to other animals. For example, there are people who are now, doing veganic agriculture, and so they're not using any animal manures and things like that. And I'm a big supporter. But again, if more of us were vegan, there'd be more choices there as well. You can't avoid all harm, just like you can't avoid, if you're going to live in the world, if you're not going to commit suicide, your actions, your living adversely affects other people. I mean, for example, we build roads. If the road has a speed limit of, X kilometers per hour, you can calculate how many people will be injured and killed on that road in a year. So building roads injures people, but we can still draw a distinction between building a road and we say 10 people are going to be killed on this road in the next year if the speed limit is 60 miles an hour. 10 people will be killed. We still draw a line between those people being killed as a result of car accidents and going and murdering 10 people. We still see a difference there. We live in a world in which in which actions have consequences and effects, and in which others, including humans, are injured. But what we've got to do is be as careful as possible. Right now, there is no incentive. Right now in our current food system, there's really no incentive, for farmers to take more care in making sure that animals are. I mean, there are things that you could do. I've spoken with farmers, and they say yes, there are things that you could do that can cut down dramatically on the number of animals that are killed, but that would be expensive and blah blah. But there are things that can be done. We're never gonna have a world ever. My ideal world would not, it would not be a world in which there would be no animal injury, because that's impossible. There would be no animal exploitation in the sense of using animals as commodities. Yes, I think that's possible. Just like I think there's a world in which we could have, in which we wouldn't have human slavery. We don't have chattel slavery the way we used to have it, but we still have slavery in the world. We still have sex trafficking, for example, is a major form of slavery, because the women that are sex trafficked are treated as commodities, and they're basically bought and sold. That's a form of slavery. We could get rid of all that sort of stuff. We're never going to have a world in which humans are free from suffering and everything is wonderful. It's not going to happen. But we could have a much better situation than the one that we have. So yeah, there will be animal exploitation. And as I mentioned in response to the first question, I think the pet industry is a disaster. And I think it's a really bad idea to keep on, allowing animals to breed so that we can have pets. I think that's terrible. So, I know vegans who don't see the problem with pets, and that's a problem. But it's a general matter. I think, vegans are coming to see the problem with domestication, although it's been a while. There are, the crops, the salad that I eat for lunch will have come from a farm where some animals were injured in the production of that salad. So
do you mean that if I am a farmer and I use, let's say, insects to kill weeds or other insects, this is okay? This is acceptable?
No, I mean, it's like, look.
I introduce species to eliminate other species, or to create, to have a balance in the populations of unwanted species.
I don't know enough about agriculture to know if there are ways to do that don't involve that. I mean, the bottom line is, unless you're going to say we have a moral obligation to starve to death, we got to eat something. I mean, we all ought to eat less than we eat. That's another problem, is we all eat, we all consume more food and everything else than we ought to. And so, because consumption itself is harmful. It's harmful to humans. It's harmful to animals. I mean, constant producing things injures animals and injures humans. So we ought to cut down on our consumption level as a general matter.
And our population, I guess.
I'm sorry, what?
And our population, I guess, because consumption, global consumption is a function of the population as well.
Yeah, no. I mean, one of the reasons why we didn't have children was because we thought it raised moral issues about, like there were already too many people on the planet. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there are also, there are all sorts of things we need to do and think about carefully. But we're never going to have I don't know whether or not you could raise crops without, I just don't know enough about that to know whether or not you could do it without using, some insects that attack other insects. I just don't know. But unless you're going to say we have an obligation to starve to death, which, is a position one could take, that we just have, but it's a somewhat peculiar position to take, and it would not be a very popular position to take, that we have an obligation to kill ourselves. We've got to eat something. And so part of the problem with a lot of these arguments is you say, well, if you can't eliminate harm completely, then it doesn't really matter. And the answer is no, that's wrong. Of course it matters. Because people will say to me, well, if animals are killed accidentally and unintentionally in crop production, then what the hell's the difference between eating animals and eating crops? And the answer is, well, if it takes 16 pounds of plant protein to produce the cow, the 1 pound of flesh for the cow, then I'm responsible for all the deaths of the 16 pounds of plant protein. I got my 1 pound steak. So I'm now responsible not only for the killing of the cow, who's a clearly sentient being, a complicated sentient being, and I'm responsible for her death, and I'm also responsible for the deaths of all of the animals that went into the 16 pounds of plant protein that produced that 1 pound of flesh. And so if I ate the 1 pound of plant protein, because I can't eat 16 pounds of it, if I ate the 1 pound, which would probably be more than I should be eating anyway, then would I be indirectly responsible for some deaths? And the answer is yeah, but it's qualitatively, it's quantitatively so different that it's qualitatively a different act. So this idea that, well, we can't, part of this thinking, I'm not saying it's your thinking, I'm saying part of the thinking is we can't live a perfect life, so why the hell bother? And the answer is, well, that's right. We can't live a perfect life. But if your conclusion is, well, then why do we bother? We're in big trouble because, then we never make any moral progress. We're never going to be in a situation where there's going to be no harm to humans. Put aside animals. We can't have a situation where there will be no human suffering, but we could make it a hell of a lot better than it is now.
I guess you were talking about harm that is unintentional. Like, I don't want to harm somebody, but I do. I'm puzzled by, by whether somebody can be a farmer and a vegan farmer and use animals, let's say cats, to eliminate rats, or let's say ladybugs to eliminate some other small insects. So can a person like this, like organic farmer, be a vegan, or because he or she are using intentionally other animals?
Well, it's not. I'm a vegan. I buy organic vegetables. I would imagine most of those vegetables are produced with manure that come from animals. I don't have a choice. I mean, I would like to grow my own food, but I just don't have the ability to do that right now. I'm hoping when I retire, I will, but right now I can't. And it's not just a question of the farmer being a vegan, it's a question of the rest of us, because it doesn't really matter what the farmer's doing, because the farmer's responding to a demand for me. And so if the farmer's not vegan, I'm not either. And so it's not really just a farmer who's got the problem. I've got the problem. But again, I mean, unless you're going to say, well, you know, you've got an obligation to die, you know, you have an obligation to starve to death. The answer is, well, you know, we should do what we can. And I think, you know, we have big brains. We are capable of doing magnificent things. And I've got to believe if we put our big brains to figuring out ways around these problems, we would come up with solutions. I mean, when you look at how science has progressed in the past 20 years, it is miraculous what can be done now. It is absolutely miraculous what can be done. And I just don't think we've paid much attention to. I mean, people in a non-vegan culture who are eating cows, pigs, chickens, whatever, there's no interest. I mean, the vegan population of people who are really sort of serious about this is relatively small. If 30%, no, I take that back. If 20% of this population were vegan, abolitionist vegans, they didn't agree with any, you know, they weren't reducitarians, they were absolutely abolitionist vegans. Do I think that there would be research into figuring out what we can do to grow plants that didn't involve harming sentient beings? The answer is yes, I do. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. So we don't know what could be done now because the demand has never been there. But I believe that we could, you know, we could probably substantially reduce any sort of anything of what you're talking about. But the bottom line is, you know, I have spent a lot of time with the Jain community, the Indian Jains, and the nuns and monks in Jainism, they walk with something called a murpati in front of their mouths. And the murpati is to prevent them from inhaling bugs. Now, I've pointed out to a number of these people that this makes no sense because they drink milk. Why the hell are they worried about the bugs when they're drinking milk? And we have interesting discussion. However, they wear this thing to recognize that our breathing has an effect on other beings. You know, and particularly when you live in a place like India, which has got, like, you know, when it gets very hot and stuff. And it's possible when you're, you know, when you're breathing that you will breathe in an insect. Happens all the time in India. And so it's not, you know, I mean, living in the world is going to involve harming other humans and other non-humans. The issue is, in what context is that occurring? And I think that when it happens in a situation where people have rejected participation in institutionalized animal exploitation, you're going to get a very different situation from you know, that. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, let's go. Thank you very much. Let's go to Christos Varsos, my amazing moderator who is assisting me in these lectures.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary Francione, for your present. I want to ask something. We observe the phenomenon that in the wildlife there are animals such as wild pigs that are quite numerous, and so the current policy of the country rewards hunters to kill these animals. How do you comment on this fact?
Well, I mean, generally, overpopulations of animals are caused because we interfere with the community in the first place. I mean, so we create these problems and then we say, how are we going to solve them? Because now we've got too many of this animal or too many of that animal. I mean, this happens, for example, I mean, we don't have to think of exotic things. I mean, you know, I don't live in New York City anymore. I used to, but I don't anymore. I live in Pennsylvania. I moved out of New York because it's better for my dogs. And so now I live on 6 acres in the middle of woods in Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, what?
You did this for the kids.
Oh yeah, I did. Absolutely. Now I'm surrounded by woods and by Republicans. And so, I mean, it's it's a conservative area, and so people say they argue that it's all right that we have to kill the deer because there's overpopulations of deer. But the reason why there are overpopulations of deer is because they have created those overpopulations of deer through all sorts of, quote, management practices that increase the number of animals. And so, and also there are no predators anymore. The coyotes are basically, you know, there are still some coyotes around, but not many. And so the deer don't really have many natural predators. And you know, there are also, like, for example, they have things called bucks only hunts where they only allow you to shoot the males. Well, okay, if you shoot 95% of the males and there's 5% left, they will impregnate the female so that you'll have a huge number of deer the following year to shoot. And so most of the time, there are reasons why we have these problems, and they're reasons that come from our own anthropocentric speciesist conduct that you know result in these issues. What do you do about them? Well, again, it's never justifiable to kill. There may be situations in which you have to you have for self-defense reasons. You have to engage in what is in essence self-defense. But I go back to what I said to Anastasia before. If we lived in a world in which we took these issues seriously and we weren't eating animals, I have great faith in humankind. I mean, I am amazed at the things that we can do, and the abilities that you know, the technological ability that we have, you know, the scientific ability. I have great reverence and respect for that. And I believe that if we had a different mindset and we would be able to solve problems more creatively. I mean, one of the problems now is that our main way of dealing with animal issues is to kill them. If an animal presents a problem, you kill them. And there are almost always ways around that. I mean, when we moved to where we are now, we live in really surrounded by woods, and we had tons of mice in the house. And so, you know, we called a bunch of people, and they all said the same thing: we'll just kill them. Well, that's the solution. You know, the world in which we live, you know, if there's a problem, you kill them. And we said, we don't want to do that. And they said, well, we can't help you then, because there are no, you know. And so what we ended up doing was we bought a bunch of these traps that didn't kill them, you know, that just sort of, you know, they walked in and we bought about 50 of these things. And we had, I mean, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. We have to go around every day checking the traps multiple times a day and catch it. We caught dozens and dozens and dozens of mice, and then we would drive them several miles away and release them in a field someplace. And we got rid of the mice. Was it real effort for us? Yeah, it was real effort for us, but we didn't have to kill them. I didn't want to kill them. I just didn't want to kill them. And what's interesting now is I see now that there are some firms that are starting now, where they offer advice about how to deal with, quote, pests, end quote, non-lethally. So they, you know, and I talked to this guy in Scotland. He's a vegan guy. He's a vegan in Scotland, and he's got a business where he'll go and get the animals out of your house without killing them. And so I really believe there are solutions to problems, you know, but we haven't explored them yet because we haven't had the incentive to do so. And we are in a culture where the starting position always is, if there's a problem, you kill them. They're pests and you kill them. So, you know, I don't think that the Australians should be, you know, killing rabbits because, you know, they get myxomatosis or something like that. I don't think that that's right. And I believe that there would probably be a solution that wouldn't involve killing on that scale, wouldn't involve it. But The Australians don't have any incentive to do that because the Australian, I mean, nobody's got an incentive because they're not vegans. They still see animals as things that can be killed if it's convenient for humans. And if that's your mindset, you're never going to come up with any other solution to the problem.
Okay. Shall I give you a tiny question from one of the attendants who wrote it? Is it justifiable or excusable to kill lice on my hair? Wait. Okay.
I didn't do that. You did. I didn't do
Okay. No, I
Okay.
didn't. But
All right. Do I think it's all right to kill lice on your hair? Well, this morning when I woke up, I felt something on my back. And I put my hand back there and I realized I had a tick. And I pulled the tick off. And, ticks can be dangerous. You can, if you get a tick bite, you can get something called Lyme disease, which I've actually had before, which is horrible. And my wife's had it twice. And I pulled the tick off and the tick was still alive. And I took the tick into the woods and I let the tick go. Look, there's a sense in which, is it justifiable if I'm walking down the street and all of a sudden I see a rattlesnake about to bite me? Can I shoot the rattlesnake? And the answer is, well, that's a self-defense question. And, if you come up to me and I think that you're about to kill me, I can kill you. So I can certainly kill an animal that is threatening my life. So the lice thing is more like a self-defense thing. My view is if there's a way, of dealing with a situation that doesn't involve killing, that's what you should do. So if I find, when we first moved here, I wasn't really used to living in the woods, and we started, we'd get these spiders that were like huge. They had hair on them. They were hairy spiders, and snakes and stuff like that. And I had to overcome my fear of these things and just sort of learn to, you put a glove on, you pick a snake up. If the snake tries to bite you, it doesn't matter. You got a glove on. It's okay. It's, you're fine. These are not poisonous snakes. These are just snakes that have teeth though, and they do bite. And so I never kill any insects in the house. Never, ever, ever, ever. If I see an insect in the house, I either leave the insect alone or I catch the insect and put the insect outside.
Lefteri, you're in.
Hi from me. Thank you for your presence and for your time. I would like to ask you, when is animal euthanasia okay, since they do not have the ability to oppose it? The animals.
About euthanasia.
Oh, is he asking me whether euthanasia is okay?
Yes. When it is okay, since the animals do not have the ability to oppose against this.
Yeah, well, one of the problems with domestication is that it puts us in the situation of deciding when it's time to kill an animal, or whether it's all right to kill an animal. I've had 26 dogs so far. I never had a dog or cat growing up. We never had animals in the house. And I got married and my wife loved dogs. And I realized that if it was the dogs or me, I was going to lose out on that one. So I got used to having dogs in the house, and now and I love them. I absolutely love them. And we've had 26 dogs, 26, I think 26, maybe more, but we've had 26 dogs so far. And we've had to euthanize animals, and I hate it. It's the worst thing in the world. And I don't really know, is it right? Is the right thing to do? And the answer is, I believe the animal tells you, in effect, when the animal stops eating and exhibits certain sorts of behaviors, then it's time. And is that perfect? No. But we've had dogs, we had a dog who had cancer for an entire year and was eating and having a good, appeared to have quality of life. Was unable to walk. And so Anna and I had a sling, and we used to have to take him out multiple times a day, take him outside. And on days that I wasn't here, she had to have somebody come in and help. And on days that she wasn't here, I'd have somebody to come in and help. So, because it was a 2-person job, it was a large dog. And so, but then when he stopped eating and he stopped having that sort of bright look on his face, then I knew it was time. And is it, are you ever really comfortable? And the answer is no, never. This is one of the problems that domesticate, one of the messes, one of the moral messes that animals make is the euthanasia question. It's like, when's it an all right time? And I mean, is it okay? And when do you do it? And the thing is, I don't think domestication should exist, but we have domesticated animals. And here, can you come and say hello to everybody? Here, I'll introduce you. Let me see if you can see him. Can you see Finley? Yes, that's Finley. Finley is blind and deaf, aren't you? Yes, he's a lovely boy, and he's blind and deaf. What they do is they take 2 gray Shelties and they breed them so that they can get a white Sheltie. He's a white Sheltie. The problem is 25% of every litter is blind, deaf, or both. He's blind and he's deaf, and the breeder was going, come on, can you say hello? Come on. The breeder was going to drown him, and we took him. And he's a lovely dog. We've had blind dogs, we've had deaf dogs. We've never had. He's our first guy, blind and deaf. And he's a wonderful dog. I mean, and he gets around very well. I suspect because the other dogs help him a lot. You're going to pull this down. Don't pull this down. And so this is domestication. This is domestication. He's a lovely boy, but he shouldn't exist. This is the problem. And so I think, euthanasia, this is one of the problems that we have from domestication, because if an animal is a wild animal, the animal just goes and, dies however the animal dies, and they make they're making whatever decisions they want to make. They're domesticated animals. We have to make the decisions for them, which is one of the problems with domestication. It's just one of the problems. So yeah, I
have a lot of questions, but I will focus just in one because of the time. I would like to ask you if the urbanization plays a role in the fact that the people are close to pets, but not to the other animals.
Say the other one as well, please, the next one.
And I would like to ask if after so many years in this field, do you think that the change that has taken place is worthy of your expectations?
Well, to answer the second question, it's never, if it's not solved, the problem isn't solved. It's never, I mean, I have to tell you, part of the problem has been that we haven't made the progress that we should have made, but we haven't made the progress in large part because the animal groups have, all of this nonsense with promoting animal welfare reform and reducitarianism and all this nonsense. It has really kept people from discussing and understanding the problems of animal use, and it's focused instead people on issues of animal treatment. So no, it hasn't gone as well as I hoped it would go. Excuse me. It never does when you're young and you think you're going to change the world, and then you get old and realize that you haven't. I don't, it hasn't gone as well as I wanted it to go. But when I first started, I was working with PETA. I've always been, I never taken money to do animal work. I've always done it, as I've been a professor for most of the time, and I just do it, as part of my work, some of my academic work, but the other work I do, I just do it. But when I first started, I was working with PETA when PETA was about 10 people. It was a very small group. It was in the early 1980s. And as PETA got larger and larger and larger, they started taking all sorts of crazy positions about, making deals with McDonald's to have cage-free. I mean, they were promoting all this welfarist nonsense And, this idea that, that veganism isn't a moral baseline, it's a good aspiration, but it's not a moral baseline. My view is it's a moral baseline. If animals matter, the very least that we can do is stop eating them, wearing them, using them. And instead of this thinking that veganism is the sort of the best thing that you can do, and it's the thing that you have to work towards and on your journey and all this nonsense, I just reject all that stuff. And so I think a good chunk of the problem has been with animal groups, that animal groups promote confused thinking about this issue because it's in their economic interest to do so, because you keep the donor pool broad by being ambiguous about the message or even sending out contradictory messages. So, you tell people, oh, well, you're a vegan. That's great. You're wonderful. You're not a vegan. You're a vegetarian. Well, that's great. You're wonderful. And, you eat everything, but you're a reducitarian because you're eating like one less meal a day. Oh, you're just wonderful. And you keep that donor pool broad. And I think that that's a problem. And I think, and so it hasn't gone as well as I wanted it to go, but that in large part has been because the animal movement is, in my judgment, a disaster. It is a complete disaster. And what it does for the most part is encourage people to believe there's a right way to do the wrong thing. And that they can eat cage-free eggs or crate-free pork or this sort of stuff, and that's better. And the answer is no. We've got to make it clear that if animals matter morally, it's not a question of reducing suffering. It's a question of stopping the consumption altogether. And what's interesting is, I think that was generally thought to be, if I had said that in 1981 when I first got involved with this, a lot of people would have agreed with me. The problem is these groups got bigger and bigger. It was like, well, we can't, we've got to take moderate positions. And my view is, once you take a moderate position on an issue of fundamental rights, you screwed up you've messed up significantly. And that's a problem. Urbanization. What was the question on urbanization? I mean, I think, look, I know that people say, well, if you're in the country, you have greater relationship with animals. Well, that's not, I mean, I live in the country. I see people have relationships with animals. They exploit them. I don't see the urbanization thing as being, generally the criticism is because people have become urbanized, they're able to talk about animal rights because they're divorced from is that what you're asking me? Are people, what are you asking me?
I was asking if people who live in the city, because they are used to live with pets, cats and dogs, are closer only at these animals, but not to the rest, because they don't have, for example, contact with cows and with other animals they eat.
Yes, that's true. I think to some degree, yes. What makes me hesitate is people have people in non-urban situations, Nicoletta, have still restricted their affections to dogs and cats and other companion animals. So it's not that, when people start interacting with cows, I know people who live in rural communities like around here, and they have, they're familiar with cows and pigs and chickens and stuff, and they don't have any different views. I mean, they love their dogs and cats, but but they don't see the cows or pigs or chickens. I mean, I think it's odd, it's crazy, but I think a lot of people think that I know a lot of Americans who think that, well, animals are treated badly in other countries, but here we have laws to protect them. I've met a lot of people who believe that, which is just crazy. I mean, it's just, the answer is the laws don't work at all. And, animals are property, and the animal welfare standards are low. They're low in America. They're low in Greece. They're low in, I know the Swiss and the English and love to say how great their welfare standards are, but that's nonsense. I mean, it's the standards, there may be small differences, but the bottom line is that animals are treated horribly in every country. Then, my country, your country, and everybody else's country. And so, but people have people tell themselves stuff. They tell themselves these fantasies. But they're encouraged by these animal groups. I mean, these animal groups have single issue campaigns. So they point, they go after fur. Well, there's no difference between fur and wool and leather and anything else. If anything, the fur campaign is misogynistic because it encourages people to think that, the people who are really the bad people are the people wearing fur, and that's mostly women. And the anti-fur campaign, I wrote about this in the 1990s. The anti-fur campaign's always been misogynistic.
These are available in Professor Francione's website, The Abolitionist Approach, in his YouTube channel. So let's go to Dimitri Andritsiou now.
Hello.
Hello, Dimitri.
Hi.
Hello there. It was really nice watching you. Thank you, Anastasia, for this chance. And thank you, Dr. Gary Francione. Yeah. Well, I have a lot of questions, but I will start with one. It's about stray animals. We have a lot of stray animals in Greece.
Yeah.
And, the problem is really, really huge. And my question is, I know it's not morally right to feed them with animal products, but because, most of the vegan foods for animals are really expensive, is it morally acceptable to feed them with animal products? And what about animals that are sick, especially cats that demand special kinds of food? What about that? How do we feel when we have to feed them with non-vegan food? And what is your take on that?
The answer is no, it's not okay. But sometimes, but it goes back to the comment I made before. Animals make moral messes that we can't clean up completely. For example, several years ago, no, probably more than 10 years ago, I was dealing with a colony of cats. And what I was doing was trapping them and getting them spayed and neutered and then releasing them again. It's called trap, neuter, release. And in order to get them into the traps, I was putting animal foods in. Is that all right to do? And the answer is no, but I got a problem that I didn't create, but it's a problem I've got. And animals make moral messes that we cannot clean up completely in a completely satisfactory way. It just doesn't work. And so when, would I feed animal foods to a starving animal? And the answer is, yeah, I guess I would. And would I think it's okay? No, I wouldn't think it's okay, but I don't know what the hell else to do. It's like I have friends who have vegan cats. They feed their cats vegan food and the cats are fine. You have to watch, some males will develop crystals. You have to watch their pH, the pH of their urethra, to make sure the urethras don't develop crystals. But I've got friends who have cats. They tried to convert them to vegan food and they just didn't work. And the cats got really sick and stuff. So and they've said to me, should I kill my cat? And I said, no, that's not a solution. Well, and it's like, yeah, it's wrong to feed your cat animal products. It's wrong. But what are you going to do? I've had I actually was, many years ago in New York City, there was this guy who was arguing that we should kill all the cats because they were obligate carnivores. And he said, if animal rights people, we're animal rights people, we should just kill all cats. And I remember hearing him say this, and I said, you're crazy. You're crazy. What are you talking about? We can't kill. Killing all cats is not a morally acceptable solution to the problem. And so, I know you have a problem there. We have a problem here too. But I've had other people in Greece ask me this very question, and they've been out there feeding colonies, and And they said, I don't know what to feed these animals because I can't get vegan foods that cats are going to necessarily. And the thing is, I've done it. I've given I actually got rid of that colony. We didn't use any poison. What we did was we just spay. See, you can't get rid of a cat colony by poisoning, doesn't work. But if you spay and neuter enough of them, eventually the population goes down, and then there's nobody to impregnate to have more kittens or puppies with. And so, spaying, neutering, and releasing actually does work. But the problem is you got to attract the cats to go into the damn things. And lots of times vegan food is not gonna work on that.
If you want to read more on the nice things and the very bright things that Professor Francione has said, you can go to his website. And in the syllabus, I have a lot of answers to questions that did not make it to the public. So thank you very much.
And my new book, you love it. It's great.
Yes.
It's got a lovely cover.
I know you will love it.
It's a nice cover.
I know.
All right. Okay.
I'm
Be
sure
well.
it is perfect, and I will order it as soon as possible.
Yes.
And I will send you my latest book, which is in Greek, in the hope that you will try to learn a little bit of Greek.
I'm an American. Most of us don't have passports, let alone learn foreign languages. I mean, come on. I mean, I'm an American. All right. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful.
It's a great cover. It's a great picture.
What is the title?
This is with a colleague of mine who we've been working on this. This is about saving the planet.
Oh,
so
good.
It's a good reason to learn Greek.
Good.
Thank you very much.
All right. Be well. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Bye, Gary. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.